And now, please welcome to the stage Vice President, Google Threat Intelligence, Sandra Joyce.
Hello. Just hold on to that feeling you were so happy about just now as I go through this. But hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the Cyber Defense Summit. I would like to go over some of the things that we're all up against right now, and then talk about what we believe we're going to be up against in the near future. So, not a lot of great news, but we do have a lot of things that I think are exciting, that we have tools in our back pocket that are going to make a difference. So, with that, let's think about first 0 days in a network edge. When we think about what threat actors are really thinking about in terms of what they can be successful at, they've really run the course on sort of the typical ways that they look at things. But what they've had a lot of success on is targeting all of those devices in the network edge. Why? Because often we don't have EDR that's deployed in that area, and they know this. So the internet-facing systems and appliances are where they're having great success. And as you can see, since about 2020, we've been seeing this regular just onslaught of nation-states, mostly, taking advantage of these vulnerabilities. And so some of the things that we've been tracking since 2022 was really the peak of 0 days that we saw exploited in the wild, but there's been a pretty steady state since then. And unfortunately, as we know, by their nature, 0 days are very difficult to defend against. But unfortunately also is that it's not just nation states that are deploying these tactics. What we are also seeing is that criminals have taken notes. They've been paying attention. And especially a group like CLOP and others, Fin11 is one that we have our eye on, because if you remember back in 2023, one of the things that they've been very successful at is taking advantage of file movement appliances. So like if you think of MoveIt or Clio or other types of campaigns, and why are they doing that? Well, if you think about it, think about all of the file transfer documents that you might use. Sometimes it's not just the files that are in movement. You also store a lot of things on there as well. So, and also when you intrude in that area, you have access to quite a bit, because this is one of those situations where you can target one and have a lot of access to many documents. Think of everything that you transfer. Why? Because you are under the impression that it is more secure. So we have actually seen a lot, unfortunately, of tactics going in this space. Going on from there, a lot of major companies that we've been looking at are actually being brought down by social engineering. And social engineering by the worst kind of APT, which is the advanced persistent teenager. And those of you who have teenagers at home, like I do, they can be very persistent and very annoying. Although we love the ones we have at home, we don't love the ones that we see out there. Now, what are some of the tactics that they're using? Well, it's pretty broad. So let me just start with, how do they get some of the information that they use? Well, we know that there is a lot of installing of info stealers, and that's all. Think of everything that an info stealer can collect: PII, login credentials, you name it. All of this PII, all of these login credentials, all of this data then gets converted into logs, and then it gets sold in underground forums and marketplaces. Last year, we were tracking those marketplaces that sell info stealers, and we were watching an exponential curve in the amount that was being sold and the amount that was being bought. Well, groups like this like to take those, and they use them. They use them to then call help desks, call IT help desk centers, and they use this to try to get through. So we've actually had the opportunity to respond to a lot of incidents where this was the method of intrusion. And we've been able to listen in on recordings of some of these, and they're very, very good. They speak with perfect English. They have, very believable problems. Things like I just got a new phone. I need to transfer my multi-factor authentication from this phone to this phone, or I have my employee ID because they got it from that InfoStealer logs that they bought. They have their employee ID, or they have just enough information and just enough sense of urgency to actually get through. And a lot happens. So data loader applications can be added. They convince help desks to do that. And we've actually been looking at some of the patterns of all of the different methods and some of the scripts that they've been using. And they always do a really important thing. They are very nice sometimes, but they're also very urgent. And we know that help desk employees are always trying to be very helpful, and they exploit that trust. So we have seen this take place across the threat landscape, and Mandiant has been responding to numerous incidents where these types of things are happening. Another annoying thing about the advanced persistent teenager is that they don't have the same, let's say, limitations and norms that maybe some threat actors had and criminal groups had before. They have threatened a lot of people. They have gone and made it personal. They have threatened family members. They have spoofed telephone numbers and come across like they're your child's phone number. It shows up on your phone, but it's really one of these threat actors. And they do this because the sense of urgency then goes through the roof. We're always recommending that when you're doing a tabletop exercise with your board or your senior leaders, make sure that you test some of these very personal methods, right? Make sure that there's an element to it where we have seen everything from a threat to have personal pictures be released or some other threat to family members. Make sure that's part of your practicing because it changes things. It changes the psychology of your incident, and we don't want to hand over that type of power. Thankfully, a lot of these threat actors have actually been arrested in recent weeks, which is wonderful. And we thank the law enforcement both here and around the world for the efforts that they're doing. Let's continue to do what we can to give them the tools to share information as appropriate, because we really need to make sure that there are risks and repercussions and consequences for this type of thing. And we're seeing it all too often. We also see disruptions to critical infrastructure. So this has gone really, let's say, from a theoretical place to somewhat of a regular occurrence. We really, outside of Ukraine and Israel, so these areas of conflict, most of this is criminal in nature. So we've seen everything from transportation, healthcare be disrupted, even logistics that bring food to our tables. So we expect to see a little more of this as well. Why? Because it targets daily life. And threat actors, especially state actors, and anybody who's trying to put a sense of urgency is trying to disrupt day-to-day life because that puts pressure on decision makers. That's how they get what they want. We've also seen a lot of AI-driven engineering and information operations. Now, this one, I'll admit, made me laugh out loud when I saw it. But if you pay attention here, they tweeted, or X'd, what do we say now if it's X? But anyway, what they did was they actually accidentally put the AI prompt and left it in there. So, I mean, it's great when threat actors make mistakes, but what I love about this is look at what it says. Describe how American allies seemingly cooperate closely with the United States and appear to hold an outstanding position on the international stage. In reality, however, right, trying to really just turn the narrative into something that's very anti-American and very much trying to drive a wedge. Think about now how AI is going to be able to enable that type of thing. What never worked really well before was that we saw a lot of information operations, and actually, when they were violating terms of service for YouTube, we were actually really, kind of happy. There wasn't a lot of pickup for a lot of these campaigns. Why? Because they didn't really understand our culture and what makes people click on things. So even if they would put hundreds or thousands of fake tweets out there, the pickup was relatively low, almost zero. But AI is helping to kind of get a little more nuanced, right? A little more aligned with what might be something that an American audience would actually click on. And so we have to keep an eye on this because this is enabling them to get better at the narrative and get a little more nuanced, a little more culturally on the nose. And so that's something that we really need to think about. Now, I know what everybody is thinking about this. I also thought it was a joke in 2022 when John Holquist, my chief analyst, told me that they had responded, the consultants had responded to an IR, and it was a North Korean pretending to be a worker, a remote IT worker. I thought it was funny because how does an agrarian totalitarian regime get away with pretending to be an IT worker and get hired at a Fortune 500 company? It almost seemed like somebody made this up. Unfortunately, not only did they not make it up, but they got really good at it for a while. And so what we saw was they were stealing credentials in the underground. They were doing remote interviews with the camera off. They were doing these types of things. They had laptop farms that were all around the United States where facilitators were helping to make it seem like they were coming from, the US instead of being controlled by North Korean actors. So the good news is that at least here in the US, we've seen a lot of this get a lot of attention, right? Before, we used to talk about this, and CISOs kind of were like, that sounds a little weird. I have other things that are a lot more important. But now, if you talk to any CISO, they either have seen a North Korean IT worker resume in their pipeline, or they know of somebody who has, or they have hired or almost hired. So this has touched now a very broad group of people. And so what we think about now is, well, how are they going to change? Because they're getting caught here. Well, what we have actually seen is the proliferation of this, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a little bit. So what's next? If we are thinking about all of this that we're dealing with, what is it that we unfortunately have to be dealing with tomorrow? I think that we should start off with ransomware. As I had said with these advanced persistent teenagers, we're also seeing how ransomware is getting to new lows. And what I mean by that is the tactics are getting more aggressive. The amounts for extortion are getting higher. I remember when it was just a very kind of low-level thing, when Bitcoin wasn't worth that much. Now, as you saw in that intro video, we have seen extortion demands of up to $50 million. They don't always pay that amount, but that's the audacity in which some of these criminals are operating on. And unfortunately, the sense of urgency that they're putting out there is now against things like hospitals. And in one really crucial case, and very disappointing, is that they were targeting the NICU, babies clinging to life. So there really doesn't seem to be a lot of limitations here. The other piece to think about is the US government has been very clear that this type of fundraising that North Koreans do with ransomware actually goes and funds some of the nuclear program work that they're doing. And that's also with the IT workers. So what we're anticipating, unfortunately, is that it's not just malware in ransomware, which we're actually seeing less of a proportion of. More of it is extortion. More of it is actually threatening to release something, threatening to talk to competitors, talk to press, talk to regulators. And so they're putting just a lot of pressure to make sure that you pay. So that's a crucial question always, whether to pay or not. Mandiant never recommends paying, but we know that victims are put often in an impossible situation. So we'll see more of that. I talked about the North Korean IT worker problem, and here's where I think that's going to happen. We're already seeing the expansion beyond just the US. We're seeing it now in countries around the world. Some of their tactics are really interesting, too. We saw one individual in Europe, for example, actually have run 9 different personas. And then those personas would make recommendations for each other. And that's how they were getting hired into these companies. In one hilarious incident, when Mandiant consultants actually told the company that they had a North Korean IT worker on staff, they responded with, really, because that's my best guy. You guys better be sure about this. And I thought, well, yeah, but there's a problem here, right? They're not just making money anymore. We've seen them extort their employees. We've seen them be, very prevalent in companies that that we all know, household names, animators on some Netflix shows, for example, but even more. And sometimes I think people lose the plot on this one. Think about it not just as you hired someone from North Korea, oops, you paid them wages that went back to the regime. We now have, all around the world, North Korean IT workers who have privileged access in networks of the world's biggest companies. And some of them are small, some of them are large, but that's pre-positioning. That is something where we have to be very careful about in the midst of a conflict or a geopolitical situation. They now have placement and access in places that can make a real difference in our economy. So something that I think the plot gets lost. We've heard a lot about Salt Typhoon infiltrating telecoms. What we're seeing is actually just beyond Salt Typhoon. Salt Typhoon-like actors coming from the MSS mostly in China, but more targeting of telecom around the world, not just in the US and not just by Salt Typhoon. So we believe that this is going to continue, and it's going to be the type of targeting and espionage that we've really grown accustomed to seeing broadly. When we used to see a little bit more specialized, so many years ago, I think it was something like 2018, the message tap campaign actually was looking at SMS text messages, and we could see the search terms. What were they targeting? Dissidents, important individuals, decision makers, government, et cetera. So it's very broad targeting, but often we'll see that it has a very specific purpose, and that's espionage. We're also seeing, speaking of China-based cyber espionage, we really are going to probably see more of that in critical infrastructure. So it's actually been a while relatively speaking, since we've seen and heard about a lot of Volt Typhoon activity that's infiltrated critical infrastructure. But we actually think that we're going to see more, or we just haven't discovered what is already out there. This is, again, one of those things where you have to be careful not to lose the plot. It's not just that there are Chinese threat actors and Chinese MSS or PLA that are in critical infrastructure. It's that in the event of a conflict, again, this is one way to really disrupt and freeze decision-making. Because if you can stop water from flowing, if you can stop power from coming to homes, you now have, as a decision maker in a country or a region, much more pressing problems. So many pressing problems for the civilian population that you may not be able to react if, for example, a conflict occurs on the other side of the planet. That's what's really behind a lot of these placement and access. That's usually what is part of that strategic positioning and the pre-positioning for these types of things. Also, the race for AI and related hardware spillover is going to spill over into cyber espionage. We believe that this really intense competition that we're in for semiconductor sector, all of the export controls that are in place, the rising use of AI, all of that demand that we're seeing is going to manifest in a lot more espionage when it comes to this very, very crucial sector. Some of the things that we're seeing in terms of innovation cycles are really interesting. There's 2 times where I believe you have an innovation cycle that is absolutely the fastest that it can be. Number 1 is AI right now between commercial companies, the billions of dollars being invested. The pace of innovation of frontier models is completely unprecedented. It's exciting. There's a lot going on. But if you're a government somewhere, it's going to be very, very hard to catch up with that innovation cycle, that amount of money, that amount of focus in a hotly competitive commercial atmosphere. The other environment that really begets that type of rapid innovation cycle tends to be during a hot war like we're seeing between Russia and Ukraine. Drone technology, just the innovation cycle going from day to day, week to week. This is the sort of the pressures and the speed that we're looking at, and this is going to drive espionage. It's going to drive a desire to understand how countries are going to align their national security requirements and their needs from a security position. They have to be able to, if they can't keep up, they're going to need to have the information, and the way they're going to get it is through cyber espionage. Another sort of forecast is that we really believe that a lot of actors are systematically targeting cloud SaaS providers. We expect more of these high-profile, really wide-ranging campaigns to continue. This is a really, efficient way for threat actors to target one and have access to many, but we anticipate seeing a lot of this coming up in the future. Multiple actors, APT28, Russian intelligence, Silk Typhoon, they're really working to abuse the trust relationships between these SaaS providers and their customers. We've seen it, and we expect to see more of it coming in the coming months and weeks. We also believe very strongly that if a country is going to do something in the physical space, they're going to do it in cyberspace too. And so this is what we're seeing, these acts of sabotage, whether it's cable cutting or power plant disruption, the things that we're seeing in Europe, what we believe is that these are going to continue, and they're going to include a cyber component as well. So when a country, let's say, doesn't have the option to operate militarily outside of the battle area, what they'll often do is look at then the other instruments of national power that they have. And in this case, really doing sabotage and this asymmetric approach to the rest of Europe is a way for countries like Russia to create effects in the places that they want. This is something that we anticipate is going to continue, and we are looking at probably more sabotage events using cyber in Europe and elsewhere. We also, unfortunately, believe that criminal use for AI is going to take off. So in the last year, we've observed the growth of illicit AI tools that are offered in the underground. So if you go right now into the dark web, into the marketplaces, for about $99 a month, you may be able to find sort of a jailbreaked version of some of the popular chatbots. You'll be able to find tools there. And that's something that we're seeing. So they use this right now. We've been seeing it for about 6 years, where AI is being used to carry out things like deep fakes or social engineering. But what we're seeing AI do to make them a little bit better, and in some cases a lot better, is the nuance of how AI can generate the text, the audio, and the visual. So these capabilities are becoming a lot more widely available, and the barrier to entry is getting lower and lower. And the reason that we see this is because the uses of them are increasing, whether it's better social engineering or vibe coding research, right? The barrier to entry being very low. You don't have to be an expert in coding in order to get started with this type of thing. In fact, we've also seen, for the first time in the wild recently, AI-powered malware. In Ukraine, we saw a Russian AI-powered malware that actually called out via API to a China-based LLM and issued and generated commands. Now, while that's not spectacular, it does signal the use of something that we've been waiting and anticipating for quite a while. So that AI-powered malware is something that we expect to see more of, automated intrusion activity, and even vulnerability research. Now, there's good news. There's good news, so take a deep breath. There is some good news. I think the good news is some of the work that we're doing on defense using AI. We were very, very proud of our LLM, Big Sleep, which was able to scan for vulnerabilities. In November, they found the first one. A few months ago, we were able to find a vulnerability in SQLite before the threat actor can use it. We actually knew that they were going to use it, but we didn't know which vulnerability it was. We were able to use Big Sleep to look at SQLite source, it's open code. We were able to look at it and find the vulnerability before it could be used. Since then, Big Sleep has been able to find 20 other vulnerabilities in the wild. So I think that what we're up against here is that it's going to be really important for us to ensure that our innovation cycle outperforms threat actors, we stay ahead of them, and that we can find vulnerabilities using AI as our powerful tool and stay ahead of the game. So thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to answering any questions outside if you have them, but stay strong. I know we're in a tough field. We do quite a bit, but I wouldn't want to be in the trenches with anybody else except for people in this room and the wonderful defenders in cybersecurity. So thank you so much, and enjoy the conference.